Two legends, one arena, and a night full of mystery. What happens next will keep you on edge. Subscribe and hit like so you never miss the next story. The Southern Coliseum in Atlanta was alive with energy, a vast dome of steel and light that seemed to tremble beneath the weight of thousands of voices. Fans had poured in from every corner of the country, filling the seats to capacity, eager to witness a night that promised history. The banners of martial arts legends fluttered from the rafters, while flashes from cameras scattered like lightning across the arena. For many, this was not just another exhibition or celebration of combat sports. It was a pilgrimage, a chance to see the names that had defined entire eras of martial arts gathered under one roof. Excitement pulsed through the air like electricity, rising higher with every cheer that rolled across the packed stands. Backstage, in the quieter corridors behind the roar, Chuck Norris stood with his arms folded, his expression steady but unyielding. His reputation as one of the greats preceded him wherever he went, and even here among other icons, there was a weight to his presence. A young reporter, Lena Ortega, only 3 months into her career with the magazine Combat Vision, approached with trembling hands clutching her recorder. She had dreamed of interviewing legends, but she had not expected her chance to come so soon. Her voice shook as she spoke, forcing herself to sound composed. Mr. Norris, tonight you're here alongside many martial arts icons, including Steven Seagal. What does this gathering mean to you? For a moment, Chuck seemed contemplative, his eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring his response. Then the edge of a smile appeared on his face, though it carried little warmth. His voice was calm, but the words sharp. I have been in this field for decades. I competed, I won world titles, I taught karate when others were still learning basic stances. Steven Seagal is just a movie hero who made flashy moves look good on screen. That's not the same as real fighting. Lena froze, her breath catching. She had been warned not to press too hard on sensitive subjects, but she hadn't expected such direct dismissal. It was the kind of statement that could ignite conversations, stir debates, maybe even light a firestorm. Her instincts screamed that she had captured something bigger than she realized. Still, her voice shook as she tried to probe further. So, you mean to say there is no rivalry between you and Mr. Seagal? Chuck's head moved slowly from side to side.
No rivalry.
We are from different worlds. I am a karate master, a world champion. He plays heroes in films. There is a difference. Nearby, Alejandro Ramirez, a rising MMA fighter just beginning to build a name for himself, overheard the words. As a boy, he had grown up practicing kicks and punches in front of the television, inspired by Norris's films and his martial arts dominance. But hearing this blunt dismissal unsettled him deeply. He admired both men, not only for their physical abilities but for the philosophies he had studied in their works. He respected Seagal for his calm, for the way Aikido taught redirection and composure, just as much as he respected Norris for his raw strength and discipline. Now, hearing his idol cast aside another legend so easily, Alejandro felt something shift inside him. The cameraman standing behind Lena whispered, "We've got it. This will go viral before the event even begins." He was right. Within minutes the clip was uploaded, shared, and spreading across social media platforms at lightning speed. The words "just a movie hero" flooded comment sections and discussion threads. By the time fans in the arena checked their glowing phone screens, the murmur of tension had already begun to ripple through the crowd. Inside the Coliseum, the anticipation grew heavier. The announcer, stepping confidently onto the polished mat in the center, began introducing the night's program. His voice carried with grandeur, booming from the speakers as he praised the legends present. The audience roared after each name, their applause echoing beneath the dome. But when the announcer introduced Chuck Norris, calling him a karate world champion, film icon, and international star, the reaction, though loud, felt uneven. Cheers filled the air, but some carried hesitation. The viral clip had already planted its seed. Norris stepped into view, acknowledging the applause with the composed nod of a man long accustomed to recognition. His face was carved with focus, his jaw tense as if bracing for something beyond ceremony. He sat in the VIP section, posture rigid, his presence commanding yet solitary. Elsewhere in the Coliseum, word of the comments reached Steven Seagal as he made his way through the lobby toward the main floor. Unlike Norris, he wore no ceremonial attire, only a simple dark shirt and slacks. His demeanor was relaxed, his smile easy as he paused to sign autographs and shake hands. Fans leaned in eagerly, and he obliged with quiet patience, his calm energy standing in sharp contrast to the storm swirling online. A security guard, uneasy, showed him the viral clip on his phone. Seagal watched in silence, then handed the phone back with a small nod. "Everyone has the right to an opinion," he said softly.
It chang is noting.
His eyes, however, betrayed awareness of the weight behind those words. Back inside, the announcer's voice filled the arena once again. And also here tonight, the man who brought Aikido to Hollywood, a 7th-degree black belt, Steven Seagal. The crowd erupted into applause, louder and more sustained than for Norris. Cameras pivoted, capturing his calm entrance. Murmurs spread across the stands, a buzz of excitement tinged with anticipation. Alejandro, seated near the front rows, felt the tension coil in his chest. To him, it was clear now, the night was no longer about celebration. It was becoming a collision of philosophies, of pride and composure, and the first spark had already been struck. As the announcer continued to introduce other names, the atmosphere in the Southern Coliseum thickened. Some fans cheered with genuine warmth, others whispered with eyes glued to their phones, and all of them sensed that the night had shifted course. What was meant to be a festival of legends was quickly transforming into something else entirely. And deep inside, Alejandro realized this would not end with polite bows or rehearsed demonstrations. This was the beginning of a confrontation that no one could have predicted. The moment Steven Seagal entered the Southern Coliseum, the energy of the night shifted. The earlier roar for Chuck Norris had been loud, but now the applause rolled through the stands with more warmth and enthusiasm, echoing longer, vibrating against the steel beams of the dome. Seagal's presence was understated. No dramatic gestures, no ceremonial uniform. He wore a simple dark shirt and slacks, walking through the aisles at a calm pace, acknowledging fans with nods and handshakes. When children leaned over the barriers with programs and posters, he paused, signing with patience and occasionally exchanging a few quiet words. Cameras captured these small moments, projecting them onto the arena's big screens. The crowd responded with cheers that grew more and more intense, as though his composure itself inspired excitement. Across the Coliseum, Chuck Norris sat in the VIP section, posture firm, eyes locked forward. His earlier interview had already spread like wildfire, and the reactions were now unfolding in front of him. Though he remained unmoving, his tightened jaw betrayed irritation. He had walked into the building expecting celebration of legends, not the subtle divide that now lingered in the air. The cheers for Seagal seemed to grow louder with each passing moment, and though Norris did not flinch, the contrast between the two men was undeniable. The announcer, sensing the shift in energy, leaned into it. His voice boomed across the dome, carrying the excitement of the crowd.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the one and only Steven Seagal.
The cameras pivoted toward him as he waved gently, his movements measured and calm. The ovation that followed was immense, a sound that rivaled thunder, layered with a sense of curiosity and support. Alejandro Ramirez, seated near the front rows, felt the difference immediately. For him, the contrast cut sharply between the two legends. Norris had entered earlier with formality and a nod, standing tall but detached. Seagal, by contrast, radiated accessibility, connecting with the crowd instead of towering above them. Alejandro remembered hearing Norris's words backstage, and now, watching this scene, he felt the growing tension inside himself. The man he had once admired above all else seemed consumed with protecting his reputation, while Seagal's demeanor suggested a man entirely unburdened by it. Between bouts of young fighters, the announcer continued to highlight the icons present. Tonight, we honor karate world champion, film legend, Texas Ranger himself, Chuck Norris.
Cameras swept toward him.
Norris gave a sharp nod, his expression carved from stone. The applause followed, but it was uneven. Then the announcer lifted his voice again. And of course, Aikido master and Hollywood icon Steven Seagal. The response this time was overwhelming, louder, steadier, a wave that dwarfed the previous cheer. The cameras showed Seagal smiling faintly, bowing his head in acknowledgement. Norris remained stiff, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The crowd could see it. They had heard his dismissal in the viral interview, and now, in real time, they were making comparisons. Every glance, every cheer, every whisper seemed to weigh against the earlier words, just a movie hero. Seagal's calm interactions continued to win the audience. Parents brought children forward during breaks, and he leaned down to their level, demonstrating a simple hand movement or signing their shirts. The arena screens magnified these moments, drawing cheers and claps that filled the dome. The contrast grew sharper with each passing minute. One legend sat alone, rigid and proud, watching silently. The other stood among the fans, approachable, grounded, and seemingly unaffected by the growing tension. Alejandro gripped the armrest of his seat, goosebumps rising along his arms. He turned to Lena Ortega, who sat furiously scribbling notes beside him. "This isn't just about martial arts anymore," he said quietly. She didn't look up from her notebook, but she nodded, her recorder still running. "No," she murmured, "it's about legacy." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air. All around them, the chants began to rise, scattered at first but then uniting.
Seagal. Seagal. Seagal.
Followed by Norris.
Norris.
The chants collided in waves, filling every corner of the Colosseum. It was no longer a celebration of tradition and mastery. The Southern Colosseum had become the stage for something raw, unscripted, and inevitable. From across the arena, for the first time that night, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal locked eyes. The roar of the crowd, the flashes of cameras, and the tension of thousands of voices filled the space between them. Neither man moved. Neither man broke his expression. Yet in that silent exchange, the foundation of the evening shifted. Everyone watching knew that this night would not end as planned. The crowd's hunger for more was unrelenting, and the silent collision of pride and composure had already begun to dictate the course of the event. Alejandro sat forward in his chair, his heart racing. Lena, her pen moving swiftly across the page, whispered almost to herself, "The crowd won't let it end like this." The arena seemed to agree. The chants grew louder, the atmosphere heavier. What began as a celebration was transforming into a collision, and the Southern Colosseum trembled with the sense that history was about to be written in a way no one had expected. The lights in the Southern Colosseum dimmed slightly as the announcer called the next phase of the evening a series of demonstrations meant to honor tradition and showcase the arts of the masters. The crowd, restless from the tension building in the air, shifted their focus back to the mat in the center. For a moment, the murmurs of speculation dulled, replaced by the expectation of spectacle. Chuck Norris was the first to rise. He stood from his seat in the VIP section, his GI crisp and immaculate, black belt tied tightly at the waist, patches stitched neatly along the fabric as marks of his long career. His assistants, young karate practitioners dressed in identical uniforms, bowed deeply to him before stepping onto the mat. The crowd clapped with enthusiasm as he made his way to the center. His stride was purposeful, his jaw tense, and though he acknowledged the applause with a nod, his eyes betrayed the sharp focus of a man already fighting an invisible battle. He began by addressing the audience in his firm, commanding tone. His words carried the weight of decades. Karate was about speed, discipline, and precision. The crowd listened intently, then burst into applause as he signaled to his assistants.
The demonstration began.
Norris moved with controlled power, striking combinations against his partners with rehearsed sharpness. His kicks sliced the air with audible force, his punches landing with the clean, practiced impact of a man who had drilled these movements thousands of times. The crowd clapped rhythmically as each technique found its mark. The assistants staggered back in carefully timed responses, falling with dramatic flair whenever a strike connected. The tempo rose as Norris's assistants attacked him simultaneously. He spun, blocked, and countered with speed that belied his age, sending both tumbling across the mat.
The audience erupted, the applause echoing beneath the steel dome like rolling thunder.
Cameras zoomed in on his movements, catching the tight snap of every punch and the sharp focus etched across his face. But not everyone was captivated. Alejandro Ramirez leaned forward in his seat, watching carefully. His admiration for Norris's skill was undeniable. The man's technique was flawless, honed through years of practice and competition. Yet, as the demonstration unfolded, Alejandro felt a dissonance. The precision was there, the spectacle undeniable, but it all seemed too polished, too staged. It looked like something meant for the crowd's approval, not a revelation of martial truth. Lena Ortega, seated beside him with her recorder still running, scribbled furiously. "He's putting on a performance," she whispered, almost to herself. "It's perfect, but it's rehearsed." Alejandro nodded, though he said nothing. His chest tightened as he wrestled with his own disappointment. The man he had idolized since childhood looked less like a warrior and more like an actor desperate to prove his strength before the eyes of the world. The demonstration reached its climax when Norris dispatched 3 assistants in a whirlwind of strikes. The crowd stood to its feet, clapping and cheering. Norris finished with a deep bow, his posture rigid, his presence commanding. But even as the ovation filled the Colosseum, cameras caught his glance, brief but deliberate, toward Steven Seagal in the stands. The image was magnified on the arena's big screen, sending a ripple of murmurs across the audience. Seagal, seated calmly, made no gesture in return. His expression remained composed, his hands folded lightly in his lap. The crowd picked up on it immediately. The tension that had already been simmering now intensified, layered over the applause still ringing from Norris's performance. As Norris left the mat, his assistants bowing deeply once more, the announcer stepped forward, his voice booming with excitement. "What an extraordinary display of skill and precision from a true champion, Chuck Norris." The crowd responded enthusiastically, yet underneath, a current of unease lingered. Many had enjoyed the spectacle, but others had begun to sense the difference between performance and authenticity. Alejandro sat back in his chair, his eyes flicking between the mat and Seagal's still figure across the arena. The young fighter's thoughts churned. Norris had proven his mastery, but something essential seemed missing. Alejandro didn't yet have the words for it, but he felt it in his bones. This wasn't about karate or aikido anymore. It was about truth, and how each man chose to embody it. As the applause faded, all eyes turned instinctively toward Seagal. The crowd's anticipation was palpable, voices rising again in chants. They wanted to see him step onto the mat, to answer Norris's display with his own. And in that moment, Alejandro realized the demonstrations had become more than just exhibitions. They were now part of a silent conversation between two legends, one trying to preserve an image, the other silently embodying an alternative. The announcer, sensing the shift, raised his voice once again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome another icon of the martial arts world. Please, give it up for Steven Seagal. The roar that followed was deafening. The contrast between the two men was about to become impossible to ignore. The crowd's roar reached a new height as Steven Seagal rose from his seat. He moved toward the mat without hurry, his step steady, his presence calm. Unlike Chuck Norris, he wore no ceremonial GI decorated with patches or symbols of achievement. His outfit was plain black training clothes, loose and unpretentious. Yet his demeanor carried an undeniable weight. The fans' cheers followed him, cameras pivoting to capture every angle as he bowed lightly before stepping into the center. Two young Aikido practitioners joined him on the mat. They were not chosen for spectacle but for sincerity, their uniforms simple, their posture respectful. Seagal raised his head and addressed the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone, calm yet resonant. Aikido, he said, is not about defeating opponents. It is about redirection. It is about harmony in conflict. It is about humility. His assistants moved forward. The first lunged with a strong punch. With the smallest adjustment of stance, Seagal redirected the momentum, guiding the strike away with minimal effort. His partner was led smoothly to the mat. The crowd gasped at the effortlessness of it. He repeated the demonstration, this time against a wrist grab. Again, the motion was fluid, almost invisible, ending with the attacker on the ground. The audience murmured in appreciation, the difference between his style and Norris's earlier performance already stark. As the demonstrations continued, Seagal explained between movements. Aikido teaches us that force is not met with greater force. Instead, it is guided. When we learn this, we discover not only skill but discipline, not only control but respect. His tone was calm, almost meditative, drawing the audience into the philosophy behind the movements rather than dazzling them with spectacle. At one point he paused, scanning the audience before gesturing for a volunteer. A teenage boy, encouraged by his parents, stepped nervously onto the mat. The Coliseum buzzed with anticipation. Seagal smiled faintly, placing a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "Attack me," he instructed gently. The boy gave a hesitant push, and with the simplest of movements, Seagal guided him off balance and back upright again, careful not to cause harm. The boy laughed nervously, the crowd erupting into thunderous applause at the gesture. Cameras zoomed in as Seagal bowed respectfully to the boy, sending him back to his seat with encouragement. Alejandro Ramirez watched from the third row, a chill running down his spine. The difference could not have been clearer. Norris's performance had been flawless, powerful and commanding, but it was designed for the audience, a statement of dominance. Seagal's demonstration, in contrast, felt personal, inclusive, as though he was sharing rather than proving.
Alejandro fällte le song Strickedeb.
One man had performed, the other had connected. The demonstration grew more intense as Seagal's assistants attacked with greater force. Each time, he absorbed their momentum, shifting and redirecting with smooth efficiency, placing them on the mat without resistance. His movements were fluid, his breathing calm, as if the chaos of attack barely reached him. The crowd cheered louder and louder, captivated not by drama, but by the authenticity of what they saw. When the final sequence ended, Seagal bowed simply, nothing theatrical, no grand finale. He stepped back, hands folded lightly, waiting in silence. And then the ovation came. The crowd rose to its feet, cheering with a fervor that dwarfed the applause Norris had received. The noise thundered through the Coliseum, shaking its steel beams. Cameras caught every second, projecting Seagal's composed figure onto the screens as chants of Seagal.
Seagal. Spread across the dome.
In the VIP section, Chuck Norris's jaw tightened. His demonstration had been technically perfect, yet the reaction told another story. The audience hadn't just admired Seagal's skill, they had felt something deeper.
Authenticity. Sincerity.
The kind of connection that no amount of showmanship could manufacture. The announcer, sensing the moment, seized it. He strode to the center, raising his voice above the roar. Two masters, two philosophies, both extraordinary in their own right. What an honor to witness such greatness under one roof. The applause redoubled, but beneath the celebratory tone, the division was unmistakable. The crowd had seen the contrast too clearly to ignore it. Alejandro leaned toward Lina Ortega, who was scribbling notes furiously. "This isn't going to stop here," he whispered, his voice trembling with anticipation. She didn't look up, but her hand tightened on the recorder.
"No," she murmured.
"The crowd won't let it end like this. And neither will they." The chants filled the Coliseum, clashing and merging into a single demand. The crowd wanted more. Not just demonstrations side by side, but a confrontation. The announcer grinned, reading the energy with the instinct of a showman. The Southern Coliseum trembled with expectation. The night had passed the point of no return. The chants inside the Southern Coliseum thundered like rolling waves, shaking the steel beams and echoing in every corner of the arena. Fans were on their feet, clapping, stomping, screaming both names: Seagal.
Seagal. Seagal. Then Norris. Norris. Norris.
The chants collided, rising into a frenzy. The announcer, sensing history in the making, raised his arms high and shouted into the microphone, his voice brimming with theatrical excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, what if tonight, right here, we witness the ultimate exchange? A once-in-a-lifetime moment: Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal on the mat together." The roar that followed was deafening. Phones shot into the air, flashes erupted, and the noise became a single demand. All eyes turned to the VIP section where Chuck Norris sat stiff, his jaw hard, his GI swaying slightly as he rose to his feet. He moved down toward the mat with an urgency that carried more than pride. It was the stride of a man unwilling to surrender control of the night. Taking the microphone from the announcer, his voice cut sharply through the chaos. "Demonstrations are fine, but true martial arts reveal themselves in action. No choreography, no safety nets, just skill against skill."
I propose a free exchange of Technikquiz.
The audience exploded with cheers and gasps, their excitement nearly uncontainable. The announcer turned immediately toward Steven Seagal, who still stood calmly at the center of the mat, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Seagal," the announcer boomed, "do you accept?" Seagal's eyes swept slowly across the thousands of faces staring at him, then back to Norris. For a long moment, silence stretched, the crowd holding its collective breath. Then, his calm voice carried clearly through the microphone. "With respect, I accept. But safety and respect must remain our conditions." Norris gave a curt nod, though the edge in his tone when he replied betrayed little concern for either.
"Of course."
Assistants rushed to roll out extra padding, preparing the mat. A referee stepped forward, more for appearance than authority, his nervous glance flicking between the two legends. The announcer's voice soared once again, almost drowned by the crowd. For the first time ever, Chuck Norris versus Steven Seagal. The two men bowed formally in the center. Norris's bow was sharp and rigid, while Seagal's was smooth, unhurried. They stepped back into their stances. The difference was immediate. Norris crouched into a compact karate guard, fists tight, eyes narrowed, every muscle coiled with tension. Seagal stood tall in a relaxed Aikido posture, arms extended, palms open, his movements loose and unreadable. For several seconds, neither moved. The Coliseum fell into silence, anticipation swallowing every sound. Alejandro Ramirez leaned forward in his seat, gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. Beside him, Lina Ortega held her recorder, hardly daring to breathe.
Norris struck first.
A snapping kick aimed at Seagal's midsection cut through the air, but with a slight shift of stance, Seagal redirected the momentum, guiding the leg past harmlessly with a single hand. The crowd gasped. Norris pressed forward, his fists firing in quick combinations, punches honed from decades of karate competition. Yet each strike met only air or a subtle redirection, Seagal's hands moving like water, always deflecting, never clashing head-on. "Engage!" Norris barked, frustration sharpening his voice. "I am," Seagal replied evenly, deflecting another blow with a twist of his wrist. The crowd began to murmur. Seagal wasn't attacking, but he wasn't being hit either. Every attempt Norris made seemed to dissolve against an invisible wall.
Alejandro's chest tightened.
He had never seen anything like it. The announcer's voice rang with excitement, narrating what unfolded. Seagal, using Aikido's principles of redirection. Norris, pushing forward with karate's precision and speed. What a clash of styles. Frustration etched itself deeper across Norris's face. He lunged again, unleashing a flurry of kicks and punches, driving Seagal toward the edge of the mat. The pressure built, the strikes faster, more forceful. The crowd roared at the intensity, flashes of cameras filling the air. Then, in a moment of sudden precision, Seagal stepped inside the storm. His hand caught Norris's wrist, his body turned smoothly, and with a pivot as fluid as water, he redirected the force. Norris stumbled forward, off balance, recovering just before hitting the mat. The audience erupted half in shock, half in exhilaration. Alejandro jumped to his feet, his voice trembling with awe. He's not fighting back, he's dismantling him without striking. Norris's jaw tightened further.
His pride burned.
He lunged again, this time for a shoulder grab, aiming to execute a throw of his own. But Seagal's movement was quicker, subtler. A sidestep, a lift of the arm, and a sudden pivot sent Norris off his footing. In one smooth motion, Seagal turned his momentum against him, guiding him down. Norris landed with a heavy thud that echoed through the Coliseum. The arena erupted into chaos.
Chants of Seagal. Seagal.
Thundered across the dome, drowning out the scattered cries for Norris. Phones flashed, cameras zoomed in, capturing the iconic image. Chuck Norris on the mat, Steven Seagal standing over him, calm, composed, his hand extended in respect. For a heartbeat, Norris hesitated, his pride locking his muscles tight. But thousands of eyes bore down on him, and under their weight, he accepted Seagal's hand briefly before pulling away. The referee stepped between them, declaring the exchange complete. Yet the atmosphere said otherwise. This was not about points or judges. This was about pride, reputation, and truth. Norris returned stiffly to his side of the mat, adjusting his GI with sharp motions. Seagal stood calmly at the center, bowing once more to the audience. The crowd's response was overwhelming, a tidal wave of approval that left no doubt who had won.
Alejandro turned to Lena, his voice shaking.
This isn't about moves anymore. It's about character.
And we just saw the difference.
The announcer tried to reclaim control of the moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for two legends of martial art.
The applause followed, but it was clear the balance had shifted. Norris's pride had driven him forward, but it was Seagal's composure that had carried the night. The chants refused to die down, the energy refusing to settle. The Coliseum trembled with the realization that something much larger than a demonstration had just taken place. And though the referee had ended the exchange, the story was far from over. Backstage, the roar of the Southern Coliseum still echoed faintly through the walls, but in the preparation rooms the atmosphere had changed. The noise of thousands was replaced with heavy silence, broken only by the sharp pacing of Chuck Norris. His GI hung loose at the collar, sweat still damp on his brow, his fists clenching and unclenching as though replaying every failed attempt in his mind. That wasn't an exchange, he muttered bitterly, his voice cutting through the room. That was humiliation. He made me look like an amateur. His assistant stood quietly near the walls, too nervous to interrupt.
From the hallway came a calm voice.
Sometimes humiliation isn't given. Sometimes it's revealed. Steven Seagal stepped into the room, still in his plain black training clothes, a towel draped casually over his shoulder. His face was calm, not triumphant but firm. The room fell into silence at his arrival. Norris spun toward him, eyes blazing. You deliberately made me look weak out there. Seagal met his stare without flinching. I didn't make you look weak, Chuck. I simply didn't make you look strong. There's a difference. The words landed like a hammer, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Alejandro Ramirez and Lena Ortega, who lingered outside the doorway, exchanged a glance. They both knew they were witnessing something far greater than a martial arts rivalry. For 40 years, Norris shot back, his voice rising, I've proven myself in tournaments, in films, in front of millions. Tonight you twisted it into some kind of lesson.
No, Seagal answered steadily.
Tonight was a reminder. Martial arts isn't about an audience. It's about truth. And truth doesn't bend to protect pride. His voice carried a weight that left the room in silence. Alejandro felt his heart pound as he listened. It was not the fight on the mat that defined the night, it was this clash of ego and humility. Alejandro stepped forward, his voice unsteady. Mr. Seagal, your films inspired me when I was a kid. But what I saw tonight, it didn't make karate look lesser. It showed me that real strength isn't about being unbeatable. It's about continuing to learn. Seagal's eyes softened slightly as he looked at him. That's the lesson, he said quietly. Though it took me too long to learn it myself. Norris bristled, his fists tightening. Easy for you to say, when the crowd cheers your name. Do you know what it's like to carry an image for decades, to live up to it every time you step into the light? Yes, Seagal replied firmly. And that's why I stopped living for the image. The weight of it will break you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena lowered her recorder for the first time that night, realizing she was capturing not just a martial arts story but the unraveling of legacy itself. Norris turned away, his shoulders tense, his reflection in the wall mirror staring back at him older, heavier, burdened by years of expectation. Seagal walked toward the door, pausing briefly. The crowd thinks the fight is over, he said, his tone calm, almost reflective. But the real battle always happens inside. With that, he stepped into the hallway, leaving the room thick with unspoken truth. Norris stood alone, his pride heavy on his shoulders. Alejandro and Lena slipped quietly out, the echoes of Seagal's words following them. Alejandro felt changed, the lesson etched into his heart, the difference between a man trapped by image and one who had chosen honesty. By dawn, clips of the exchange had spread across the world.
Headlines bläst, Seagal stehs kalmes Norris crumbles. Pride versus Composure.
But what resonated most wasn't the takedown, it was the restraint, the refusal to humiliate, the insistence on respect. Fans debated endlessly, yet one truth stood out: authenticity had triumphed. Weeks later, in a modest dojo on the outskirts of Atlanta, Steven Seagal stood before a small group of students. His hair was shorter, his demeanor lighter. Aikido, he told them, is a beautiful art. But beauty alone isn't enough. It must be tested, questioned, understood. Tonight, we explore not only what works, but what doesn't and why. For hours he taught with honesty, admitting failures openly, welcoming challenges. The aura of invincibility was gone, replaced with something stronger: authenticity. In the back row, Alejandro watched with quiet pride. This was no longer the Seagal of films, but a teacher who had learned the hardest lesson of all: to be vulnerable without being weak. At the seminar's end, Seagal approached him.
Still training? He asked.
Alejandro nodded.
Yes, but differently now. I train for truth, not for image. Seagal's faint smile was answer enough. Outside, the evening sky burned with the colors of sunset. Seagal paused at the doorway of the dojo, reflecting on how far he had come. Once he had been trapped by the need to appear unbreakable. Now he understood, true strength lay not in never falling, but in how one rose afterward. The Southern Coliseum would be remembered as the place where pride cracked and authenticity shone. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal had entered its lights as legends, but only one walked out with his legacy strengthened. Yet Seagal knew the victory was not over another man, it was over himself. Alejandro left the dojo that night with Lena's article already published on his phone. Its closing line stayed with him: true strength is not the illusion of perfection, but the courage to face imperfection honestly. He slipped the phone into his pocket, carrying the lesson that would guide not only his career, but his life. Behind him, the dojo lights dimmed. But the truth revealed that night would continue to burn, long after the cheers of the crowd had faded. This story is just one of many that will leave you speechless. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe and like to catch every new chapter.